Subject today is a power steering changeover. Power steering changeover from a 1978 Chevy C20 onto this 65 Chevy C10. This one had manual steering from the factory, and the C20 had power steering. This is for the gearbox portion of it, the drag link, the idle arm, and the tie rods, and the steering adapter. Anyway, it makes it so, for one thing, you have a lot quicker steering. It's 3 turns from lock to lock on the power steering setup, instead of 4 turns that it is on your manual steering. You have 2 turns from center on a manual steering, and this one you have a turn and a half. So it makes the steering definitely much quicker, and it just makes the rig so much more drivable in general. Anyway, to do the steering changeover, the main tools that you actually need is this. Once you remove the steering box and the drag link and the idle arm and the tie rod from the C20, you'll need this to convert where the steering box mounts on from a piece of channel to a piece of plate. I did it right up to the edge there on the top and the bottom, and about it's about 4 inches or so from the end of the steering box in the rear, and about the same from the end of the bolt, I should say the furthest bolt where the steering box went through. Did it about the same in the front, about 4 inches from the front to the back. And I converted it so that it was a plate that actually fit inside the frame. So we have to use this to remove that component from your parts vehicle, and then also to put the steering box on. It's indented. It doesn't fit flat on the frame like the original, but it has an indentation. But you want to have that indentation in there in the frame because it sets the steering shaft straight. I've seen the aftermarket kits, and it puts the steering box off, and it doesn't make the steering shaft centered anymore if you want to use a stock steering column. Then it makes your adjustment for your toe is much tighter on one side than it is the other if the steering box isn't on center. That's why we didn't use the kit, and we used that piece from the frame off the parts truck to set up our holes and basically put it in from behind. It makes it double strong. The other thing that I did was I got the steering box bolts a ½ an inch longer than the stock ones, because you're going through about another ¼ inch of material, and I put a washer in between where the steering box mounts in the frame, but a thin one. Maybe the other tools you'll need is a Sawzall, of course. You want to trim your part with it, and the part that removed from the parts truck, let's get the raggedy torch edges off of it and stuff. This definitely helps too. A little hand hacksaw to kind of get you started where you have to make your trim and stuff. And you'll need this for when you heat up the frame. The part of the frame that you want to heat up is right where it makes the 90, to indent that so your steering box seats up nice and flat where your forward and your rear bolts are. You'll need that after you heat the frame up with the torch on the top edge and the bottom edge. You'll need that to pound that in. And then in the middle, I just did it cold. I just did it cold in the middle. I only heated the top and the bottom. And once I did that, the indentation in the middle was actually quite easy to achieve. And then this is the steering box bolt. Size is 5/8. Just kind of crank them on down. They're a little tighter than what you can get out of the 3/8, but I got 5/8 and a couple extensions and a half drive ratchet. And this one here is the 3/4 size, and the half drive also. It does the bumper bolts. Actually, makes it nice and easy to remove the bumper to access where the steering goes in there and kind of slide it in. You slide your plate underneath the cross member and stuff. And then these are for the steering adapter. And this is a 3/8 drive ratchet. The sizes that I use here are basically the 3/4, the 5/8, the 9/16, and the half. You see, the 3/4 is your bumper, the 5/8 is your steering box, the 9/16 is your idle arm side, where your idle arm goes onto the frame, and then the half is the steering adapter, so it's a 9/16. And it's nice to have this pair of reach around vice grips to kind of hold your plate inside your frame where you're measuring for your holes and stuff where your steering box goes. And of course you need a drill. Nice powerful electric drill. There's I don't know the exact sizes, but what I did is I just sized the holes that I was going to have to make with the holes that I already had in my sample pieces. Except for the one, I did a 3/16. I pinned the steering shaft with 3/16 holes all the way through it. Is what I pinned that steering shaft with, and it goes right on the slipped right over the bottom of the steering shaft of the stock one. And I was going to actually weld it, but that really pinned it real solid, so I'll just check that every now and again, and then if I ever have to service it, that can just be unbolted and slid up. And then of course you'll need the grinder to clean up your edges on your plate that you have to put inside there to sleeve that repair with, and then I had to make a couple of steering brackets and stuff, and for the power steering pump. That's kind of another subject. But anyway, this is all the main tools that I actually needed to perform the job. Okay, now first getting started on the C10 power steering conversion, 65 C10 power steering conversion. We're using a steering box, drag link, the idler arm, and the inner tie rods of a 78 C20, and a power steering pump and hoses too. Anyway, we're going to put this on this steering box and make this mate to this right here as close as we can. When I had the steering box up next to it on this steering stand, you notice that this bumper bracket is going to be in the way. So what we'll do right now is we're going to remove the steering box, the center link, the tie rods, and then over on the other side we're going to move the drag link, the idler arm, and the inner tie rod on the right side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how the relation of the steering box will be with this one, what we're going to try to achieve with the steering box and this homemade steering box stand. Okay, that's it. Where it is right now is I have it pretty well situated so that this hole right here and this rear upper hole of the steering box actually in pretty close alignment. The forward upper hole is in pretty close alignment with the stock forward upper hole on the steering box, on the frame there. So what we'll have to do is we'll have to remove this bracket because it'll actually be in the way, and we'll have to change the mounting relationship of this bracket after we have that installed. The other thing that we're going to do is, since this comes up slightly higher than this, we sawed this off, and this is actually just a round bar. So what we'll do, just so we can use a stock steering column in it, what we're going to do is we're going to use this piece right here that came out of the 78 C20. I'm going to cut this rectangular part off, and you can see from here that it's actually round. I'm hoping that this is the same size as this, that I could sleeve this over that. Then I'll put a couple of fasteners in here to hold that, just to make sure that that's in the right place. And maybe I'll zap it with a couple of welds, one on each side, with the fasteners. And then I'll be able to hook the steering adapter up just how it's supposed to be in relation to the steering column. So anyway, like I say, I've already cut this off so that this end of this is almost to the end of this right there. That gives me plenty of room to sleeve this. This will actually be a tube that will go over this round bar. So what we're going to do now is we're going to remove the steering box, the tie rods, the drag link, the idler arm, and the tie rod on the right hand side is all going to be removed now. I'm also going to remove the front bumper and the front bumper bracket on this side, just to facilitate it being a little bit easier. Now what I'll do is, after we get that removed, then we're going to put this component right here, which we also removed from the 78 C20. I'm going to cut this down to get this all nice and smooth here, so it fits up inside the frame, up inside the channel. But first I'm going to jig it to make sure that these holes line up. Then I also have to indent the frame some on this to make clearance for the steering box to sit in there so that the steering shaft still comes down nice and centered. I don't want to move the steering box out because then that throws the geometrics of the steering when you try to align it and stuff. And then also puts the shaft in a bind. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to indent this in the frame so that the steering box sits in nice and where it should. Pitman arm is centered with the steering box so that you won't have to change this a whole lot to align it. Okay, so here we go.
Are you ready?
Everything's kosher. Yeah.
All right. Get ready to slam it. More?
Okay, so this is what we got after we had conformed the middle of it in. And this is what it'll look like with the steering box on here. It sits nice and flat. All the holes seem to line up good. Pull this down, and that'll mate up. Like I say, hooking it up to our stock steering shaft. Stock steering column, I mean. Okay, right up in here is the plate off of the 78 C20 that we trimmed off that has the steering box mounts, and we got this hole just a little bit, this hole here, we made sure that it was as high as we could really get it, and this hole here as low as we could really get it, so that the steering box and the steering shaft were nice and straight up and down. Okay. All right, this is our final mock-up of the 78 C20 power steering box and pitman arm, drag link, and tie rods. We also used the bottom sleeve of the intermittent steering shaft. When we cut this rod off, I cut it off real close to the steering box and sleeve this over, and it just so happened that it happened to be the right size. So what I'll do is I'll pin this with some fasteners, and then I'll weld it on top and on the bottom. Since we did this without a kit, the kit spaces the steering box off the frame, which makes the geometrics wrong for centering your steering. And it also makes it so the steering shaft isn't straight. With the steering box mounted in the stock position on the frame, these are just very thin washers in here. The steering shaft sights nice and straight, and the pitman arm is nice and straight off of the steering box, so the vehicle will turn the same amount from side to side without radically trying to adjust this to get the toe. Right. Here on this side, I measured it out. I have the drag link the exact same distance as a stock drag link from the center of the cross member here. And then we have the idler arm off of the 78 C20 in its position. So the steering is nice and straight. There's plenty of the stock room there on the inner tie rods to the cross member. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take it off, back off. I'm going to replace these sleeves with new ones so that they turn nice and free, and get this all cleaned up and painted. And then we'll be able to reinstall it because it's all in place now. Okay, now we have the final installation. The steering shaft is real nice and straight. There's plenty of adjustment here in the tie rods. It's in there nice and centered. The idler arm is installed the way it was in the 78 C20, and there's plenty of room on our toe adjustment for this side too. When we give it the final toe adjustment, you could tow it to actually the specs for a 65 C10. And this is, we had to modify the bumper bracket just slightly. Just had to cut some of the upper part of the channel off of there. And we used a stock hole to put the bracket on. It's a little bit closer to the steering box, but it has clearance. And the steering shaft and the pivot arm are nice and straight. The next step is going to be to set it down and pin the tube here to the bar. Okay. The next time you'll see it, it'll be done. This is what it steers like now with the steering setup on.